Hi folks, I'm going to share my desktop and we're going to go over using Windows containers and Docker and how we could create we can containerize an existing application using Docker. So if you're not aware right now, Visual Studio has Docker integration already created and it's fairly automatic, so it's very nice. And this, I'm using Visual Studio 2017 and really going to walk you through taking an existing .NET application and containerizing that, how you would containerize that, and then how you might and how that works using Docker. I've got a Windows 2016 server. Certainly could do this on Windows 10, but I'm showing you on Windows 2016 server. And I'm using the application Mercury Health, which is a sample application, sample.NET application. The idea is not to go to Linux or using .NET Core on Linux, but showing you how to use a Windows container. So first thing you'll need to do is make sure you've got the Docker tools installed. So if you go to Docker and install Docker for Windows, that's what I did. You'll get a nice little Docker for Windows icon here. One thing I did have to do on the server, when I start it, I have to make sure I'm running that as administrator. So make sure you're doing that. And then you'll see that Docker is running here and working nicely. The other thing we'll want to do is start the Visual Studio 2017 as administrator. So once we get that going, what I'm doing is I'm showing you how to set up a web app. In a later video, I'll show you how to set up SQL Server if you want to do that. So the web app, if you look here, I came up with Mercury Health, and you'll see I have a Docker Compose, and under here I have a Docker file on the Mercury Health web. So the way I was able to get that, I did not add that manually. This is a template that is set up in Visual Studio. So if I right click on web app and go to add, and you'll notice that's grayed out because I've already done this, but you can add Docker support. So when I click that, it goes through a lot of different gyrations and adds these files. The Docker file, which tells Docker some container information that you want. So if you look at this Docker file, we're taking the ASP.NET 4.7 app. Sorry about that. Go back here. The ASP.NET 4.7 image is what we're taking it from. And the working directory is inet pub ww root, kind of a sample, something we're familiar with. So that's the Docker file. We can get a lot more complex there. That's all the complexity I'm going to show you here. The other thing I wanted to go through is that you need to make sure that your machine has enough power to run the virtualization. So we have to have Hyper-V enabled, and the hypervisor needs to be enabled as well. And the way you can tell that, so is if you go to your tools. So if I go to my settings, and we'll just go to apps. This is the fastest way I know how to get in this new interface. But if I go to programs and features and turn Windows features on and off, if you look here, there's Hyper-V. Hyper-V hypervisor needs to be enabled. I was on a smaller VM and had to upsize it so that I could enable hypervisor. So you need to have, I believe it's 4 cores and 32 gig of RAM on 2016 to enable hypervisor or something like that. So Just make sure you have those right requirements, and you can enable that. And then Docker can use hypervisor on Windows and do containers. So once we have this all set up, really all I have to do, and it seems simple, is go here, click Docker, and it will run the Docker container. So I've already done that. But one thing I want to caution you is I ran into a few issues on the Windows side. I've done this with Linux, and the Linux side is actually very quick and seems very straightforward. When I'm trying to do containers on Windows, I'm having some issues. Issues like it's taking too long for the Hyper-V or the VM to respond, and that's giving, Docker is waiting too long, so I get timeouts. One way I got around that, I'm not sure if this is the actual reason that happened, is if you look here in the Docker override, the compose override, I just changed the ports from 80 to 8080. Not sure if that's the actual reason why it worked, but once I did that, it seemed to work a lot better. So let me show you a couple of Docker commands to show you that I have a container running. So if I type in my PowerShell interactive window, Docker PS, now I can see I have created my actual image, my actual container. So there's container ID, and the container name is actually here. It's kind of an ugly name, so we can do some things, I believe, in the build script, in the compose file, or the Docker file, to change that name. Something you might want to do. But if I want to access that, I need to find out what's the IP address here, because it's not localhost. And the way I can do that is use docker exec, and on the container I can execute a command. So I give it execute on this container ipconfig, right? So if I do that, I get my different IP address, and now if I go over here, wrong one. I've got to go copy the IP address. And HTTP, blah, there it is. Hit enter. It's going to take a while, but actually Mercury Health will come up. So I pushed out the web app out to that container. So that's really kind of the gotchas. I will say this, I'm not using the most robust app or robust server to do this, but I am, I do have, it's fairly beefy. The other things I would put there as well that you need to think about are container sizes. If I go to production, I can slim down container sizes with different commands. Right now, I think the container sizes on Windows are fairly large. There's some new technology that may slim that down. That's coming out, but I haven't experimented with that. But right now, Docker's using different technologies. But anyway, if you want to do a Windows container, this is kind of the way I've found to do that. And I'm going to let this run away, and here you go. And then we're showing, this is the container, and this is Mercury Health showing up there. So we can actually do some things on there with that app. So that's really a quick way of how you can set up a Windows container on an existing .NET app fairly quickly. And then we can start pushing those images out to Artifactory or wherever, or Docker Swarm or something like that, and then start using that. So hopefully that's helpful.